Howdy, folks. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about when we should include our kids and when they should be excluded from adult conversations, adult activities, or just general social gatherings. This is a topic that we've discussed on numerous occasions in our home. Our families had a way of handling different situations, which we're going to discuss. And we've gotten this question from a number of you listeners. And so we thought it'd be something fun to discuss. If you enjoy our podcast, please take the time to leave a rating or a review on whatever platform you're listening on. That encourages us greatly. And it also helps the podcast reach more people. And I know here's the deal. That takes so much time, and you're probably like driving or you're busy, cleaning up or making meals or doing something. And so I realize it takes time to stop and do that. So it honestly means a lot to us each and every time we see a rating or a review, or even when you take time to leave a comment on YouTube or like the video. I get it. It's like you're a busy person. So thank you so much for all of you that have done that. And thank you for doing that if you're going to do it. Anyways, let's get this thing going.
The Now That We're a Family podcast.
Well, Katie, it's so funny when we started talking about this subject. You and I both we both learned something new about each other that we related on, and how we have some passionate thoughts about different aspects of this topic, when children should be included and when they should not be included. And I actually do think a lot of people are emotional on the subject based off of their childhood experience. A lot of times it's inevitable that we parent oftentimes out of reaction to how we were raised. Basically our childhood is still going to be the most influential thing in how we parent, whether we want to replicate it or take things from it, or we reacting from some negative things that happened in our childhood. And so I think that it's one of those things where obviously your past and your history and your experience is going to have a huge part in informing how you parent and how you go forward. But I think this is one of those issues that people can get emotional on.
Yeah, and it's something that I think I care a lot about, because as a child, I felt like there were certain settings where I was like an outcast to that setting, and I didn't really look up to those adults or want to hear from those adults very much, because I felt so much like children were a nuisance, they were annoying, and there was nothing really good that could come from children. You just have to survive them until they get old enough to have a grown-up conversation with. So, and this really, I'm just going to launch in here, I guess.
Jump into it.
We had this different experience with two different sides of our family. So with one side of the family, I'm really close with both sides of our family now, and I am so incredibly grateful for them. But for whatever reason...
So you're talking about both sides of your family when you were a child. So not like your side and my side of the family.
Yes.
Right?
Good clarification.
From when you're a child. So like
aunts and uncles and grandparents on mom's side and dad's side kind of thing.
Got it.
And while I'm so grateful for all of our extended family now, there was a period of time when I was really under 14 years old, where whenever we went to certain family reunions on one side of the family, children were seen as, just kind of like annoying. And whether or not that was the view on children, that was what was communicated about children. And so all my siblings relate on this, how it was like we didn't like going to those family events until we hit our teen years. And at that point, we started being seen more as people that had something to offer and something to share. And so I do think that when it comes to including, and I put that in air quotes, or excluding children, I think that the attitude behind it and the view of children and why this is happening really matters a lot before we dive into specifics, because I do think that there's times when children should not be included in grown-up activities, conversations, meal times, all those things. But on the flip side, with another side of the family growing up, I always felt wanted. Like I felt like my presence was desired there. I had really good relationships with my aunts and uncles. They would hang out. with me and just treat me kind of like, from a Charlotte Mason perspective, children are born persons. I felt viewed that way, that I was just as much of a born person than someone who was, 50 or 80 years old or 20 years old. And I had just as much to offer. And that's how I felt. And the funny thing is there were still on that side of the family grown-up activities like a poker night or skits that only the adults could participate in. And I was still sent to the back room to play with the other kids, but I never resented it. And I never felt, yeah, sure, I wanted to hang out with the adults, but I never felt like they were sending me away because I wasn't valued. And so I do think that before we dive into times when this might be appropriate and times when it's not, our attitude and our heart towards children are going to be impressed on the child, I believe, more than whether or not they were included in the activity.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it is interesting as you were talking about you mentioned a few scenarios, and it just was recalling, I was starting to recall different memories from my childhood and how I don't think, we could just dive in because I think I agreed with everything. That was such a great preface, I think. And so I don't even know why I'm talking because it's like, I don't want to add any more to that preface. I think that was so great. The intent, your heart posture towards children is going to be communicated. And obviously that's true for your direct kids, but even towards other people's kids, right? Because I think that's actually one of the more recent questions or kind of comments we got regarding the subject is a couple, or I think it was a husband or a wife, I can't remember, saying when they go to events, they feel like the general culture at these events is get the kids out of here. We want to have grown-up conversations, right? We want to have a calm meal. And so they'll send the kids to the basement to watch a movie, or they'll just get them out of their hair. And they're always kind of pushing the kids off. And I like you said, there are times where we both think it's very appropriate for the children to be excluded from activities, but I never want them to feel that attitude from us. And when I go back to my childhood with my parents, with my aunts and uncles, with extended family, I never felt like I was being excluded because I was a nuisance or because they didn't value me. It was just a definitive, like, this is an adult activity and you're going to go play with the children. And this is another thing too. You're not like a victim by being sent to play with the children. That's awesome. It's like, that can be a really great thing. And then also it was something to look forward to, especially on one of the sides of my family growing up. The adult dinner table, like when you're at those big family events, was something to aspire to. And like the conversation was more mature, the conduct was more mature, and where we held these dinners, because they actually happened pretty regularly, there was like two separate rooms. It's like the kids were in a different room at their table, and then the adults were in their room at their table, and it was something to really look forward to. And yeah, there was an expectation, and I don't know if there was like this objective age that you had to reach before you were invited. I think it was probably just more of like a maturity level before you were invited. But it was a thing of honor to be able to be welcomed up to that table, and it wasn't dishonoring to be at the children's table. It was just a definitive, like, no, the kids are in here, and we're going to help them get their food, and they'll talk, and they'll come in and reprimand if kids are getting crazy or out of hand. You're still expected, to behave yourself. But it's really interesting, actually, as you were talking, all the memories that I was starting to have in regards to those different scenarios.
Yeah, so I think that maybe one way that we communicate to our kids this is that adult-only conversations, games, activities, dinners are the pinnacle of being able to hang out. And kids are not a part of those times. If that's communicated to kids, that the peak enjoyment for adults getting together is when children are not present, that's really an unfortunate thing to communicate. And I think we need to revisit a few things. I think we need to revisit our child training, because I 100%, Elisha and I were laughing about this, have been in church trying to visit with people afterwards and have had a certain child decide he was just going to start pulling up my dress and like misbehaving out the wazoo. And Elisha and I look at each other like, what is going on? We are out of here. Because trying to have a conversation is not fun in that environment. But that's on us. That's on us to go home and parent, to give that child the attention that they need, positively, negatively, however they need it, all the ways, so that next time we go into that setting, we're able to visit and enjoy our children, and our children are able to take care of themselves and enjoy being with us in an appropriate manner. So I think we need to revisit our child training often. And then I also think we need to revisit just our view on how cool it is to do things together. And there are times when structuring an event that's like for instance, this summer and for the past few summers, our home group gets together at someone's house outside, and we bring a meal, and it's a fantastic place for our thousands of kids to come. For all the kids to come. The kids aren't a nuisance because it's not a glass chandelier space, right? When we go to our church, the lights are on and the music isn't super loud and it's not a show. And so it's really easy for you to feel comfortable parenting in that sanctuary, right? So those are two different examples where I think the atmosphere is like, we can have a great time with kids because the atmosphere is supporting that. Now, if, my idea of a very good time is like going to go get drinks with the ladies or something, and that is the best conversation that I could possibly have.
Yeah, that's the pinnacle.
Yeah,
like
that's
you said.
the pinnacle. Then I'm just begrudging all the other times because my kids have to be there and I can't go out and do the thing.
Right. Yeah, I think that was Katie. Wow. I'm telling you what, I love listening to you. You're saying so many good things. Because I think that attitude permeates not just in regards to other people's children and to family in general, but I think you hear it when the way parents talk about getting away together on like romantic weekends. And you've done a really good job of changing the language in our home. You actually approached me. This was great because we were talking about I would mention, oh yeah, Katie and I are getting away for some time. And I would say something along the lines of like, yeah, it's going to be great. We're going to be kid free, or yeah, we're going to have some time away from the kids. And I remember you made a point to talk to me in like such a gracious way. You're like, hey, let's really emphasize that the reason we're doing this trip is to connect in our marriage and to have fun with each other. It's not to get away from the kids. And I thought that was a really good insight. This was a few years back, right?
Yeah, I was going to say this had to be a long time ago because I feel like we both communicate this way.
Yeah, and I think that really revealed to me how that language really is it's so common. And I think I would use that language because other people, you feel like other people can relate to that, right? Like, oh yeah, kids free tonight. Oh, that's the best. Like, oh, you finally get to go have some fun together. Versus like, no, yeah, we love pouring into our marriage and getting quality time with one another. And we're investing into our marriage by getting away. But we're not doing it to get away from the kids. Right? Like the point of doing this isn't just to be away from the kids, it's to pour into our marriage. And I think that you can carry that language into other environments as well. And like you said, if you honestly feel that the highest of highs is like you said, just going out with your buddies, like going to the cigar lounge and being able to just have your good conversations there uninterrupted. And that's like the pinnacle, then that's going to be communicated to your children. And it's going to be communicated even when you're in other environments that aren't that specific one. You just want to have those good conversations. You want to be able to talk with not being interrupted, and your kids are going to feel that tension. Versus if they know like, oh, my dad loves being at home and talking with me. My dad loves being at home and whatever, reading with me. Does that mean you can go have fun with that you can't go have fun with your Of course it doesn't. Of course you can go do those things, right? You can go hang out with your friends and you can go have those times getting coffee and whatever, having some conversation, but don't act like that is the best. Cause well, one, it's not, I don't view it that way.
Yeah, it's not.
And I think that even when we go to some social settings where, because of maybe where the kids are at, or because of the lack of activities for kids there, or it's maybe just not a kid friendly environment, I'll find myself being on like dad duty more than social duty, right? I think we've all found ourselves in those situations. And a lot of times, people play the dad duty card when they're introverted and don't want to talk to people. And I've done that as well. It's always nice to have that option. But sometimes you're forced into it and you actually would enjoy talking to a lot of people that are at this event. It's funny because I don't resent it. Like I don't resent being off, like outside in the park area with my kids while all the adults are having a conversation. And there's like, would I partake if I could? Yeah, I would totally partake in the adult conversations if I could, but I don't hold it against my kids. And I don't think they sense me holding it against them because I'm genuinely happy with them out, whatever, in the foyer or outside, playing in the yard.
Yeah. And I think something that is important is it might be the pinnacle of your enjoyment right now. We aren't saying that it's not the most exciting thing to be able to go kid-free somewhere and enjoy conversation without your kids there. But what I'm saying is it's not the most enjoyable thing there is out there to be had.
Right.
It's possible to enjoy spending time just as a family or even with a family and another family and enjoy it just as much or more. And so I'm just saying it is possible out there. But we do have expectations for our children. And in group settings, in other settings, I remember getting a comment back when we were on Instagram. I was sharing how there were, I don't know, I think there's like 50 grandkids and over a dozen great grandkids, and we were all getting together for Thanksgiving for a family reunion. And someone was like, how do you have conversation without the kids? You put on movies for them. And it was funny because I had to smile because there's never a movie going on for the kids ever for a whole week of us all getting together. And there's, 60, 65 children at this event. And the expectation is the children are going to be there. But the expectation is also that in the living room or at the dining room table, the children, if they're sitting with the adults, are going to be quiet and listen. Or if they would like to play, they're free to go play outside, play upstairs in the bonus room, and engage themselves. But the whole event is not based around the children being clingy and whiny and needing to be entertained. And it's also not based around entertaining the children. And I think that this is a big thing where parents who are children focused, who value the children, can sometimes make things complicated for everyone around them. And we've seen this, and we don't want to be these parents by elevating their children to this status of like, now everyone must cater to my children and make them kind of the star of the show at the expense of what's actually happening.
Yeah. Of the conversation that was already going, or like the adults kind of like level of content, right? Meaning like, like the more mature things that you're talking about. And you're so right. And it's like, okay, like let my child talk now. It's time for their moment. And they try to bring them up. I think that always obviously comes from probably a good spot in that parent's mind. But I think it's always a little bit awkward and inappropriate. And I don't think it's actually doing the child any favors at all. It's funny. This actually was talked about. I'm really excited to get this book. I just read a little bit about the book. Boy, what's that lady's name?
It's called Bad Therapy.
Yeah, I think it's called Bad Therapy. I'm really excited to get it. So maybe I'll have more to share about this. But that scenarios like that were talked about or are talked about in this book. And I'm really excited to hear her take. But just, in her whole, this is like a social science lady, I think. Boy, I don't even know why I brought it up. That's how little.
Well, I think
I'm excited. I did order the book. I'm excited to get it because it's kind of talking about what you just brought up.
She's saying it's healthy to exclude our children.
Yeah, exactly.
There are times when children need to know that they are not an adult. And why that's healthy for kids is because it gives them something to aspire to and to grow into. By treating children like, yes, we need to treat them like they are persons, natural born persons, but not that they have the same, they haven't earned the right to speak as much as the aged. There's something to be learned from someone who has more experience. And right now they are in that apprenticeship role, and they need to view themselves when they are around a bunch of adults as in that apprenticeship role and show respect to the adults and honor to the adults who have been here longer by being quiet, by listening to them speak. They can pop in if they have something to say to the conversation, but we've all been in conversations, probably, I know I definitely have, where a child comes in and just starts talking about something totally off the subject, and their parent really backs them in steering the whole conversation around this kid's experience that has nothing to do with the situation. And it's just like they're taking up so much airspace that is not warranted. They should be sitting there listening to everybody else.
Yeah, and honestly, I think this goes your entire life. I think the Bible talks about respecting your elders and just there being a true place of honor for those with gray hair, for those that have been through it and they've done things that you haven't been through and done. And it's so I feel like this happened actually recently at our home group where almost all the families there are like roughly in our age range, right? And we're all in the same age, stage of life. But some friends visited that were older. You know, they were a generation older than us. They were grown, retired, and like we all just knew like there was a place of honor that they had been married longer than any of us. They had raised children. They had seen and talked to hundreds of marriages. And we just knew that. And you just know that. And so you give them more airspace, right? Like they don't have to like elbow their way in to get a word in. You're quick to listen to those people. And I think you need to train that in your children for them to do the same thing with adults, to say, hey, be slow to speak, quick to hear. And that's the thing. Conversations, like we were always welcomed to the living room adult conversations as children, but we were expected to like listen politely. And it's not that we were not allowed to speak, but we just knew like we knew like we better really have something good to share that was relevant to the conversation if we were going to speak up. And I think that attitude is appropriate for children, respecting their elders, like you said, giving them something to aspire to. That again, I think we should continue to do this our whole life, right? When you're around older people, having this level of humility, we were like, I don't fully know what they know, like I haven't experienced what they've experienced. I've got something to learn from them, and there's not necessarily any reason these people would want to hear from me right now.
Yeah, I like the word that you said, polite. I think it's a general politeness instead of this entitlement of the world revolves around me. My parents value me. They want to make sure I'm heard. And so they are going to stop. It's even if it's at the expense of everybody else. And that's raising a child that ultimately it's going to shoot them in the foot because they aren't going to be very well liked. Adults aren't going to like them very much. And so they aren't going to want to go out of their way for your child. And it could potentially raise this entitlement mindset that goes into adulthood where soon peers don't like them very much because it's like this kid knows it all. And it's kind of like, I mean, you think of like a mommy's boy or something like that. This can really happen when we're trying to bring our children around us. Just because our children are there doesn't mean that we're treating them all like adults just because they're there. I think of tonight, one of our children is just very engaged in Elisha's and my conversations right now. And it's just so sweet because he's always there. And he just sits at Elisha's side. Tonight he was embroidering and sitting next to Elisha. And there were times when at first he would pipe up with something totally off topic and just start going. And we had to say, hey, we want to hear about that, but now's not the right time because daddy and mommy are having a conversation about something specific. And now it's really sweet to see how there's a lot of other hours in the day when he can come and tell us something exciting when we aren't having a specific conversation, but also how his brain is working and he will ask a question that pertains to the conversation, or he'll bring in some information he heard from so-and-so and relate it to the conversation. And it's really fun to see him start to track and think, how can I add value here in a polite, appropriate way instead of just blasting in and talking about whatever the heck I want to talk about.
It's genuinely adding value. It's
and he's getting really fun to talk to.
Yeah, and it's nice because, like you said, we tell him when it's not. We're like, hey, like you're detracting from the conversation. Like
we might not say that.
Well, we were saying just kind of like, hey, like don't interrupt. We're trying to have a conversation here. But I think of that even tonight. Like we didn't even know he was listening. We were trying to remember the name of something. And he piped in and was kind of like, oh, are you talking about da, 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 da? We're like, that's great. Like he's adding value to the conversation. He knew what we were talking about and he came in with some information that was helpful. But I do think this also can lead to, like you said, the whole mama's boy situation. I can't remember if we've talked about this or if I feel like we've referenced somebody that wrote about this, but like, making excuses for your kids all the time, right? Where it's like, oh, they didn't understand what I was saying. The kid might say that, like they didn't get my joke or they didn't. It's like, it's so easy as a parent to be like, oh, well, they probably weren't listening very closely, or, they were maybe distracted, versus just being like, yeah, well, you'll get better at telling that joke as you get better at communicating. right? That's a better thing to say to your kid rather than putting it on everybody else. And you see this in sports, you see it in music competitions. Say I didn't get picked for the team, or I didn't get as much playing time, and you give them the excuse, right? You give them the reason that just makes them a victim ultimately at a young age, where it's like, oh, well, their son is also a point guard, and so they want their son to play more, versus just kind of like, well, now you have something to work towards. Like you can, like the more practice, you might get more playing time, if you improve your game, or like, hey, go back and practice your fiddle more. You didn't make the top 5 at this fiddle competition. You're capable of practicing more. That's a great goal, to put in more time and more work and make the top 5 next time. And I am so guilty of this. Because the thing is that the excuses that you see are very valid oftentimes. All those, you see through a lot of the things. You're like, well, this is subjective. So-and-so prefers this style of play, and you can go on and on and on. But that's actually not doing your kids any favor by showing them all those reasons, all those excuses, as to why. We're kind of getting off topic a bit, but
no,
as to
I think
why,
it's good.
like they weren't, nobody wanted to hear from them in the group conversation, or everybody was speaking over them. And it's so easy to put that on the other people versus just being like, well, hey, like think of, like why didn't they want to listen to you? Right? Like why you can get better at communicating or being more relevant in the conversation, and people will want to listen to you.
I'm glad you brought that up. I was thinking about it as you were saying. I think it's from the book Future Men, where he's saying, don't let your children take responsibility for their mistakes, or let them take responsibility for whatever happens, instead of when we take the responsibility away from our children, then they aren't able to handle it as adults. And like you said, this stuck out to me big time, because I really want to have an encouraging atmosphere in our home. Elisha and I are very, very affirming of our kids.
Right.
I think partially just because we think they're so cool.
Yeah.
But then that can bleed into an unhealthy wanting to make them feel good when they're disappointed or things don't go their way. And so you shield them from all those social errors or success failures, where it's like, they just need to feel that now, and it can encourage them to get better. And we can still, help soften the blow. But we don't need to say, oh, well, that criticism was irrelevant. Right. Or, you're a winner to me, honey.
Yeah. Yeah, you're basically communicating that, even though we wouldn't say like, hey, it's okay, because we know instinctually, like, we're not about participation trophies and awards. It's like, no, like, it's good to participate. We celebrate participation, but if you didn't get first place, you didn't get first place. Right. And there's something to that. But it's something to work towards, right? You can work towards getting first place and ranking higher and whatever it is you're doing.
And I feel like we can say something to our kids like, well, you worked really, really hard. Those kids worked even harder, or they've spent a lot of time practicing.
Think about how much time they've practiced.
Yeah. And so it's not saying like you're lame, do better, but it's saying like there's room for improvement here. You did a great job, but there's other people that are out there working harder too. Yeah. And so anyways, that's a fine line to walk, and that's something that I'm trying to get better at, because it's so tempting for me to just be like...
That is my instincts time and time again. Because like I said, I think usually the excuses or the reasons you see in your brain are valid, but also that's just kind of how the world works. Like, there's always a reason, perhaps, why you got, why you didn't get the promotion and somebody else did. That's beyond performance, right? That's beyond just that, like, objective, who's better at the craft. And I think that's the world we live in. And so it's like, you got to equip your kids to live in that world.
Yeah. In the long term, it makes them less successful, and it makes them less liked. So like, they aren't always going to have you liking them so much. They probably want other people to like them too. And so letting them swim in the deep end of the social pool and learn how other people respond to them can be healthy. Yes. And that's something that we really want to learn. So one way that this really happens that we've seen is including our children in grown-up sports, games, or activities that they aren't capable of participating at a level that they just aren't capable of participating in.
They bring the whole quality down. Like they bring the quality of play down.
And I think that is just a very unhelpful thing to do for our kids, because again, we're thinking, okay, we want to bring our kids into something we enjoy. And yeah, like when we're playing family soccer out at the park, we love, Elisha and Elisha and I being on opposite teams, we're playing with our kids. That is fun. Grown up to kid activity, we're including them, right? But when we go to volleyball at a friend's barbecue, our kids aren't allowed to play at the barbecue.
At the adult game. Yeah, in the adult game.
It's a grown-up activity, and they need to learn that, hey, when you can't play at a certain level, then you can't play.
Right.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
There are certain things that are age specific, and you also don't have to be a part of everything. It's good for you to actually, you'll probably have a lot more fun, and no one's going to be glaring at you if you just go and play with other kids and come up with something creative to do at your age level.
Yeah. I mean, Dude Perfect does stereotypes on that. I think they do like their basketball stereotypes.
Oh, do they?
And one of the stereotypes is the guy. He's like, hey, you know, like, he's like, hey, do you guys need one more or whatever? You know, they're like, yeah. And he's like, then can my son play? You know, and it's such a funny. They nailed it, right? Because that's happened. It's funny. I grew up going to open gyms with my dad. Okay, that was his kind of like, you know, his hobby, his outlet was going to these open gyms and playing basketball. And I can remember the day that my older brother was invited to join the men in their 5-on-5 basketball. And it was like a monumental moment for our whole family. Like, not just for him, because we had been going all these years and we were dribbling and shooting on the side hoops and staying out of their way as they're running full court. And we wouldn't even think to ask to play with the grownups, right? And then Joby, I don't know, he was probably like 15 or 16 or something. And they needed an extra guy, and they asked Joby to play. And it's like, we talked about it that night. You know, we came home, we're like, Joby, like, what was that? And it was something that I so looked forward to. And of course, I still remember the time where I got to play at the open gyms. I was a little younger than Joby was, I think, okay, because I worked a little harder than him. No, I'm joking.
Speaking of those hardworking.
No, I'm joking. He was always way better than me at basketball, still is. But being able to go play with the men was something that I looked forward to. And it is just, it's a bummer for everybody, just on like a straight up enjoyment level, when you're playing 5-on-5 basketball or you're playing whatever, 6-on-6 volleyball, and everybody kind of knows how to play, and you're playing an actual game and you're following the rules. But then there's the one like 9-year-old or 12-year-old, and you're kind of like, wow, like what do we do now? You can't play real defense on this kid. Right? Like, everybody here could block every single one of his shots, but what do you like back up and like let him go, you drive through, and it ruins it for everybody. And so just give that kid something to work towards, you know?
Yeah, you can tell that this is a pet peeve.
Yeah,
Elisha.
I just kind of blacked out there. I don't even know how long I was talking now that I think about it.
We really like participating in sports. And we've also felt, I guess, we haven't had children that are old enough to be like, hey, to ask us basically to play the sport, because they've been very content to bounce on the trampoline or do something with the younger kids.
Yep.
But we have sensed how everyone is so frustrated because ultimately you're putting your desires as a parent on everybody at the social event. And you're saying, you will babysit my child at the expense of your enjoyment. And it's just not something that I think is socially appropriate to do or very likable. You're making your kid, regardless of how nice everybody is being, you're making them the target for everyone's displeasure.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
It's not a nice thing to do to your child.
No.
And so you might think, this is great, we're having a good time. Well, go do that sometime on your own.
Just the two of
and
you,
like practice with them. And like, that's what my dad did with us. He would drill and drill and drill volleyball because we wanted to be able to play and not be the one that like couldn't play. Mm-hmm. And we've played a lot of grown-up games where there's like tons of levels of grown-ups playing. And, you know, some people are good and some people aren't or whatever. I've had my mortifying pregnant moments on the volleyball court and people still let me play, which is really nice. But it's like, there is an element of, well, you're all grown-ups, and so you can kind of like laugh at the person who's not doing it or help them out or teach them or whatever. Doubt. But it's just like, regardless of how fun it is for you and regardless of how oblivious your kid is, if they're socially apt, eventually they're going to realize that no one really likes them being there. And it's just kind of unhelpful for them. I also think it's unhelpful because it just raises this entitlement of, I go into a situation and I make the world revolve around me. Instead of like, well, this situation isn't for you. And so, but you know what is for you is like playing house or building a stick fort or doing all these things. Like, kids only have one childhood, and there's a lot of things that only kids can do that are socially appropriate.
Yeah.
So like have fun with the other kids, have fun with your friends, have a great time. But I guess we never want our children we never want to force our children on anyone else, if that makes sense. If we can bring our children around us in a setting where it's just mattering to us, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like if they're polite and well-mannered and not disrupting the environment and we're able to bring them into an environment, then we want to do that.
Yeah, no doubt.
But not at the expense of everybody else.
Yeah, again, okay, now that my emotions have subsided a bit, I want to come out. We love our kids trying new things, being competitive, testing themselves, getting outside of their comfort zones. And oftentimes that will be that requires playing at a level or competing at a level that's beyond your current ability. Right. I think that's a part of growth in any category of life. You got to, sometimes get out over your tips. Right. Is that what they say? A little bit. Right. And I think, or at least feel like you are. And so we want that for our kids, and we love seeing that happen. We're talking about like in social settings where it's like you decide to make that public social setting an opportunity for you to do your parenting that maybe should take place at home. Right. And it could be, we were talking about sports, but it could be like in a board game or in just a group game that you're playing. And you're like, oh, we're going to have so-and-so come in and do a turn. And it just, again, you could talk about like, well, hey guys, this game is it's really not that important. It's just a game, right? It's a trivial little thing of entertainment. And it's like, yeah, we all get that, but this isn't the time. Like you're now doing your parenting on our watch, basically, right?
Like everyone's now parenting your child.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what then can become frustrating. And it's not doing that child a favor at all. Like, teach them the rules when you go home. Be like, hey, you know what? Do you want to play? I think you would love this. I'm excited to show it to you, back at home at a different time.
And the thing is, as soon as they can like be as good as the poorest player, like playing the card game or whatever, then like you can feel good inviting them into play, and everyone will be stoked to play with them because they can keep up and play the game. So I don't think it's necessarily an age thing, but it's a capability thing. And I think it's good for our kids to realize that there's capabilities that they need to grow in.
Yes.
So that said, we do think there's times to actually exclude our children from grown-up activities, but it's the heart in which we're doing it. We aren't saying, this game is so much more fun with you. We just want to avoid you.
Without you, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's saying, exactly, without you. It's saying, hey, this game wasn't made for you.
Right.
So we want you to have a good time. We're going to have a good time. And in the car, we're going to talk about it. And like, we're stoked you're here. We're all here together as a family. But there's certain activities that just aren't for your age level right now. Mm-hmm. And I know that you can do this because this is how my parents parented, and I never felt excluded in a you're no fun kind of way. It was always a like, oh, we'll work with this on the side, but now's not the time.
Yeah, and I don't want that to ever be my attitude. Like, hey, Dad, can I play? Like, we're playing 3-on-3 basketball, and when one of my sons was like, hey, can I play? I'm like, scram, kid. Nobody likes you. Get out of here. I don't want that attitude, and I don't want to have that attitude towards other kids. Well, again, like I don't have that. That's not my heart, right? I would love it if, between games we'll shoot around. I'll work with them on their form or whatever, and they can snag rebounds and pass it back out. And that's what I did my entire childhood. And I could tell my dad was taking pleasure in me being there. Like they loved me being there, and my dad would bring me out onto the court between their games, and he'd work with me on dribbling or on whatever skills, that he was working with me on. And then the game was getting ready to start, so I'd have to get off the court. And so I never thought like, oh, it's because he hates being around me and he never likes doing anything with me. It's just kind of like what you said. Like this is an activity for grown-ups, and you're not grown up. There are activities for children that you can go participate in and have a great time. And I think that we're setting our kids up, like you said, so many times. We're setting them up for disappointment and for failure, and also just like have nobody like them too when they grow up, if they think that they deserve being a part of every activity just because they exist. It's like, here I am, so of course I should play the game. Here I am, of course I should be included in the conversation. And this is actually a lifelong skill. We've probably all experienced like speaking up in conversations where you realize like, boy, I was in over my head. That was one of those times where I just should have been listening. So that happens your whole life. And so you do, but the best time to learn it is when you are a child, to be like, oh, these are one of those conversations where I sit and I listen. And if they ask me a question, then I will answer. And again, that happens your whole life into adulthood. You'll find yourself in those conversations.
Yeah, there's also times like with activities, even as an adult, where it's like, you know what, I'm going to sit this out. I'm going to watch it a little bit. I'm going to learn how this flows so I can jump in and I can start participating at a level that's not, totally making everyone stop and be like, okay, well, instead of this being a fun activity where we're going to all get together and do something we love to do, we're going to spend 2 hours teaching Katie how to play with us.
Right.
Because it's like, how often as parents do you get together and play something that's just fun and grown up?
Sure.
Most of the time you are doing things with your children and it's fun, but it's at a lower level.
Yeah.
That's more age appropriate. So sometimes it is fun to get around and have that grown up activity. And, even if you signed up to bring your kid along, it might not be like everyone else signed up for that.
Right.
Okay. So anyways, that was a soapbox, but we stood on it. So I do think there's other times too with like the comment that specifically you read to me today when we decided to talk about this was certain families, when they all get together, they send the kids to the basement to watch a movie or whatever. And we have been to events where the kids all went and they watched a movie. And one, we always knew what the movie was. And what I think is fun about our friend group is when that has happened, which it's actually only been maybe 1 or 2 times, it was like, this will be a really fun thing for the kids. So it's going to be special. And we're going to all play games as adults. And then we have something special set up for the kids. We're going to get them popcorn. It's going to be this experience. And the kids weren't sent away in this like, don't bother us situation. There was a lot of parent interaction in and out, but it was like this is going to be fun for everybody. We have something age appropriate for everybody. Yeah. And I think it was very thoughtful of the host. And it was, again, done with the heart of, it's not like we don't want the kids around.
Yeah, we value the kids.
But this is going to be more fun for them and more fun for us.
Right.
And so, because of the types of games we were playing. So I thought it was very thoughtful. And something like that doesn't always have to be a terrible idea. But if that's something that's like consistently happening, then something that you could do is offer to bring an activity that the kids could enjoy that maybe is not watching a movie. Some of our friends that I know have a mobile Lego bin and they bring it with them when the kids need to be engaged in a small space. And I think it's so fun. We've been able to be the beneficiaries of that thoughtfulness because they bring in the Lego and the kids play for a really long time with that and have fun engaging themselves when they aren't able to go outside, when they do have to be in a confined space. So you can be creative presenting a proactive alternative if you don't like what's happening.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, be a part of the solution or bring the solution. And I do think you're right. Those couple scenarios that you mentioned, those stick out as being great memories in my brain. One was a Christmas party. Another one was just like a friend's game night. And they didn't treat the kids as though they were a burden and a hassle and we didn't want them there. They actually were extra thoughtful to the children. They're like, what would the kids really like doing together? What would they have a blast? What would be a special, like a unique experience for them? And they kind of went all out, making it fun for our kids. It was a highlight for them. And then we got to, like you said, enjoy something that which we don't get to enjoy very often, which was a bunch of adults sitting around the living room, for mostly uninterrupted, for a couple of hours. And it was really fun. It was really special. But we weren't all there. It's kind of like, oh, thank goodness the kids aren't here. We were all stoked because our kids were stoked. It's like, oh, that's awesome. They're having a great time. Great. Well, we can have a great time here.
And I think something too, when we think of including our kids in activities, we could think, or including our children and making them feel welcome, I guess, we think they have to be included in the activity instead of like, we can include them by just welcoming them there beside us.
Oh, yes.
And Elisha does a really great job of this. Like when you do different work events or when you go places, you take one of the kids and the child's not there to participate in the activity, but they're there to watch and learn from you and hang out with you and enjoy the time in between. And I think that's so special. The kids love doing that and they know that they aren't, called upon to participate in the work meeting or in the event or the work that Elisha's doing, but they're able to be there with him and he's enjoying their presence and they're enjoying his presence. And I think that that's a really, really sweet attitude to have. So like, even if we were at a game night and like one of the kids didn't want to watch the movie, they're more than welcome to come in and sit next to Elisha and I, and no, they can't play the game, but they could sit there and laugh and enjoy it and snuggle up next to us. They're more than welcome to be there.
Yeah, actually. And you know, when I think of bringing the kids into different environments with me, that's presented so many parenting opportunities, because many of them have had to learn, like, oh, I can't just jump into this conversation or start talking about random things when daddy's meeting with so-and-so. Because I've been in, you know, talking to a contractor, or talking to like at the bank, talking to a banker, or meeting somebody about business. And I bring the kid, one of the children with me, and like, you're there talking with the banker, and I sit one of the kids down, and they just jump in, you know, and they'll say something so off, like they're trying to get my attention. And I had to go out and be like, hey, when daddy's talking, like, you just need to sit patiently. We're taking care of things here. And I think that's a good thing to learn for a child now in those particular environments. So it's come with its growing pains, but I would rather do that than while they're young, right? Than them jump into those situations when they're a bit older, and it's a little more awkward at that point.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because when we practice this around family, this is where we can get the most lax, is like, we're all hanging out with my family, and the kids are so comfortable with their aunts and uncles. Their aunts and uncles are only a few years older than them. And so they just have this comfortability where the adult bleeds into their generation almost. And so sometimes we really have to work on drawing that line, because they can get so used to interjecting and diving in that then they do go to a situation like the banker, and they're sitting there and they're like, hey daddy, like, did you see the dog in the red car outside?
Yes,
it was
exactly.
You know, and it's like, okay, now's not the time to talk about the dog in the red car. Like, as soon as the meeting's over, you are welcome to tell daddy all about the dog in the red car, but now is not the time. So like, when we practice in environments where there's adults that we do feel really comfortable and close with, then in those environments, we aren't going to be embarrassed by our children in those environments. And while I don't want to set up our parenting to parent from this place of like, oh, I don't want to be embarrassed publicly by my kids.
Sure.
It brings peace to everybody when everybody's behaving appropriately socially. And so it's like, you don't want the child to be embarrassed for the child's sake either. Maybe they're too young to be embarrassed, but one day they will be. And so it's better to just teach them how to behave appropriately now. And they're going to thank you for it later when they're 16 and they know how to conduct themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. You're so right. Cause that's not a good, that shouldn't be like your primary motivator. Like, I don't want to be embarrassed about my kids. That's like the worst. However, like, you want them to be a blessing, and you want them to be a blessing, not just to you, but to those that they're around as well. And so anyways, yeah, it's learning, respect. It's learning, it's being considerate of the situation of others. It's being selfless, and actually thinking of others before yourself, and learning that at an early age. Like you said, that example, which has happened so many times, where I'm having a conversation with somebody and they see a fire truck pass by. And of course, when we're driving as a family, they can do whatever they want to do to get my attention usually, because they're like, did you see that huge fire truck? And they're stoked to see it. But they need to learn, like, no, they can't just pull on my shirt, and be like, daddy, you know, until I look at the fire truck. But you need they're learning experiences. Anyways.
And everyone's learning together. But I guess all I'm saying is there's two sides of the ditch here. And one is, we've all seen the parent that's always embarrassed by their child and squirming in their seat and like wishing their child wasn't there.
Yeah.
But then on the other side of the ditch is the parent who's not embarrassed by anything their child does and just lets them free range, you know, and they're just like kicking over the trash cans and, you know, throwing spitballs and all this.
And they'll get up from the banker, like they've got their appointment with the banker, and they'll take 20 minutes to listen to their child and to let them explain what type of fire truck it was, and, you know, and give them full like control of the conversation at the banker's expense, at everybody else that's waiting, you know, in line at the bank, they're at their expense as well, and at the child's expense eventually too, because that's just going to come back to really hurt them later on in life.
Yeah. So we aren't perfect in this area, obviously. I've been in both sides of the ditch.
Me too.
And thank the Lord for his faithfulness with our parenting, and for our friends and anyone we've interacted with publicly who have been very gracious with us in moments when we're like, how is this happening right now? Or, sometimes your kids just surprise you. Sometimes your own emotions surprise you and you're like, why am I feeling this way? I know this is wrong. So yeah, it's a big learning.
I do think your heart needs to be, your loyalty is to your child. I love that Douglas Wilson emphasized that. Like, your loyalty is to your family first and foremost, to your children. And I want them to feel that even in those moments where, you are sending them away, but they know like, oh, but my dad's loyal to me more than to his friends that he's hanging out with in there. Right? Like, he's got my best interest above theirs. And I also think too, going back to one other thing that he said, because this was just recent, is he talked about how you want the leash to be really short in those younger, it's the whole, we do with the opposite, right? You have a really long leash when it's kind of cute, when they're in those social settings and they say something inappropriate or they say something that's not relevant to the conversation, and everybody can kind of laugh at it because they're young. And then they get older, and he talks about like they get to that age where they're capable of getting pregnant or getting someone pregnant, and then we react and we try to shorten up the leash, right? And we're like, man, we really got to like rein this in here. And he was like, it's the opposite. It's like it was way better to have the short leash when they're younger, to teach them manners, to teach them behavior, to teach them ethics and morality and all those things. And then as they grow older, they're 12, 13, and 14. And you want them to come into those social settings and in those environments, and you're giving them more leash, and you're kind of empowering them and equipping them to partake in the conversations and participate in the conversations. I really want my mindset to be that way versus the other way, which I think is far more natural. I think naturally, because our kids are cute when they're younger, it's like, hey, well, they're figuring it out, like, and you don't really parent through those things. And then they get older, and you're reactionary, and you try to rein it in and teach them every little thing they can and cannot say.
I love how you brought it back to that, Elisha. That word loyalty, that's huge. And that's how we should probably end tonight. I wish we'd started with that, because I feel like that's what we were trying to communicate through all these different what if scenarios, is we always want the loyalty to be felt between our children and us. And going back to that first scenario I gave, I always felt like one side of the family was so loyal to me. And then circumstantially, it didn't matter what happened. Whatever the adults decided was best, I believed them. And I think when you don't feel that loyalty, then even if someone does have your best interest at heart, you don't feel that way. And so we want our children to know that they have our hearts, we have their best interest at heart, we love them to death, and we are going to make decisions for their good and for their benefit, regardless of whether they would like us to make that decision or not. It's kind of like what God does for us. Wow. And the way he parents us, it is for our best and for our good, regardless of whether it makes us uncomfortable or is painful or is something that we would have chosen for ourselves.
Sounds good. Folks, thank you all so much for listening to us. Talk to you next time.
Bye.